Hello, I'm Gus Downing, publisher and editor of the D&D Daily, and this is the Loss Prevention News Network. With us today is Jeff Fulmer, Vice President of Loss Prevention for Barnes & Noble and Chair of the NRF's Legislative Committee, and Jon Gold, the Vice President, Supply Chain and Customs Policy at NRF. First, I'd like to thank both of you for being here today. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you, Gus.
Jon, obviously you've been representing the nation's retailers with Congress for the vast majority of your career over the last 20 years or so, and Jeff, as the Legislative Chair, you and Jon have probably worked together quite a bit over the years. Gentlemen, can you give us an update on where we are with organized retail crime legislation as we stand now?
Sure, Gus, I'll go ahead and start with that one. Again, thanks for the opportunity to be here. As it stands with organized retail crime legislation, obviously it's still a top priority for National Retail Federation to continue to work with Congress and our federal agencies to try and push an ORC-related bill. Obviously the debate has changed over the past 10 years or so. We've been talking about organized retail crime. And, you know, unfortunately, because of the deadlock we're facing right now in Congress, it's very tough to get anything through at this point in time, even though we see bipartisan support for doing something on organized retail crime. From our perspective, we're really looking at trying to, first and foremost, put a title to organized retail crime in federal legislation. We hear a lot from the different states that have organized retail crime laws on the books, which are doing a lot of good work, but yet there still needs to be that federal piece of it for that piece of the ORC crime that goes across state lines. And we hear that prosecutors and others have trouble trying to figure out what laws or what regs they're going to use to prosecute. So that needs some help. They need some additional help on resources, and only that can be provided by the federal government. So we continue to work with Department of Justice, Homeland Security, and other agencies, but we continue to see deadlocks in Congress just on ideology of moving forwards. On bills, you have the issue of overcriminalization now that Congress is looking at, so they don't want to, they're looking at how do you take some of the laws out of Title 18 and not necessarily add them. So we're facing some of those challenges. But
because of the prisons being overpopulated?
Correct, that's correct. They're looking at, you have misdemeanors where, you know, folks are going to the jail. Why are we doing that? So, but our job as part of the Legislative Committee, and Jeff can talk to this, is try to educate our legislators and policymakers that ORC, we're not talking about your everyday shoplifter. You know, this is a major crime. It's organized crime, essentially, as we've talked about, where folks are stealing massive amounts of product and are selling it for significant profits. You know, as we've identified, it's a $15 to $30 billion hit to the retail industry. You have an impact on the state taxes, where they're losing money there, and you have a potential health threat to consumers who are purchasing products they buy online and swap meets, flea markets, wherever, that potentially weren't stored properly. And you look at infant formula as the best case that's out there. So we think there's still a very big need for doing this, and we continue to push. You know, unfortunately, as I said, we're kind of deadlocked in Congress, and there are a lot of other bigger, kind of sexier issues that have also taken priority, whether it's cybersecurity, privacy, or what have you, that fall, unfortunately, to the committee's jurisdiction that also handle organized retail crime.
But this is probably one of the most important things of the Legislative Committee, only because we almost have a perfect storm for organized retail crime. So you see out there with all the surveys that are being done that organized retail crime continues to be a growing problem for retailers. And the problem that we hear from a lot of the retailers is we have jurisdictional issues. So the retailers that have done a great job, whether it's at the Fusion Center or establishing the relationships with federal law enforcement, that they kind of garner some favors. Will you take this case for me? Will you take this case for me? But there's a lot of retailers out there that can't do that.
You mean from a federal standpoint?
Correct.
And then go under the RICO Act with organized crime,
right?
And fall them under, get them to fall underneath that umbrella.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay.
So, it's a growing problem. It needs to be addressed from a federal standpoint, and it's our #1 priority for the Legislative Committee.
Well, and as you mentioned, the resources, the money, because if you actually create it, you're going to have to staff it, manage, and monitor it.
Correct, and that's the other issue in Congress right now is, they're not trying to spend any money. They're trying to reduce the amount of money they spend on different projects. So we want to take advantage of the current resources that are there, the different fusion centers that are there, the different task forces that are there, and try to repurpose them to include organized retail crime as part of their everyday mission. We think it's an important issue, and we saw the award ceremony this morning, and you hear about some of those cases and the amount of dollars that are part of that, the ties back overseas where we're seeing some of these cases. It's incredibly important, and for us to really explain to legislators and policymakers, this is why this needs to be part of a federal law and why DOJ and others need to take this up to help at the state and local level, because again, it's not just limited to the state and local level.
Gentlemen, what can a LP executive or a retailer do to help that legislative push or that effort? What can they do?
Right. Well, first of all, thanks for the opportunity, Gus, and I also want to thank my friend Jon Gold. I think it's through the leadership of the NRF and the 14 retail members of the Legislative Committee that allows us to be successful and help work towards other retailers. From an LP professional's perspective, I think that not only are we LP professionals, but we're also citizens. So we can reach out to our legislators, whether it's our congressman with the House or our senator, and tell them that they believe, either through them or through their company, that we need to add organized retail crime to Title 18, that it's an important issue as a retailer. A lot of companies have government affairs departments. So, those of you who have government affairs departments, reach out to your government affairs department and tell them this is an important part of retailing, and that we need collectively, not just individually, but also as companies, we need to do a little bit more. And then obviously we have retail associations that a lot of us are members of that play an important role in forming and shaping legislation. So I think that's another avenue that we could take.
And corporate counsel, obviously.
Absolutely. Yes.
Obviously.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, as Jeff said, not only participating in the federal associations that are there, but you have state retail associations as well that are very engaged and active on the state level to help push state level ORC, and again, we've had 26, 27 states that have done that. But make sure you have a voice. Again, as Jeff said, talk about the issue, raise the importance of the issue, but also as you're working through with the prosecutors and other government agencies, work with them and see what they need as far as what needs to be in a federal ORC bill, and ask them if they can help push through their associations or their contacts with their members of Congress as well. One of the questions we get on the Hill is, well, where is the AG from this state on the issue? So it's important that all levels of government hear from the LP professionals as to what the issues are and why it's important that there be a federal ORC bill.
So you have to educate every level.
Pretty much.
Basically, in order to support the bigger picture.
Correct. That's correct.
A little personal opinion question. Okay, we got 24, 26 states with ORC legislation. How long is it going to take for the rest of them to follow suit?
I wish I had a crystal ball. I don't know. It's probably going to take several more years for that to happen. Again, until we have the retailers that continue to raise the issue, the state retail associations who raise the issue, and you find a couple of members of the state legislatures who want to be champions, it's going to be a problem. But I know, this is why it's important for the retailers to participate in those state associations and raise the profile of this issue within them, so they can then go to the state legislatures and say, this is an important issue for us. Here's what it means for the state in lost revenues. I mean, we heard in Florida today, $100 million in lost revenue for the state. That's pretty significant, especially in this time of dwindling resources for states moving forwards.
Do you think we run into the perception problem from a standpoint of the legislators sitting there going, well, it's just shoplifting? I mean, how big and bad could it really be? I mean, do you run into that at all?
Well, you run into that a little bit more when you have states that try to move the felony threshold level. So, and typically it's not from a lack of understanding about it. It's more an attempt because of money, because of prison space and those sorts of things, that they have a tendency to want to move that felony threshold level.
Well, and we're bursting at the seams in the prisons throughout the country.
Right.
I mean, we're looking for every way we can to get them out of there as opposed to putting them in, which is a real problem for the retailers, which at the end of the day, the consumer is paying for it.
But you know, part of that is the problem is that you have, within the country, you've got an issue where we're decriminalizing retail theft. So, you know, you watch an episode of Cops. It's, you know, one of my favorite shows. And I know that may sound funny, but, you know, I was watching an episode the other night, and here's this guy who stole. They pulled over his car, and you know, he said, you know, I stole all this stuff. They gave him a traffic ticket. Yeah. So there seems to be a movement of decriminalizing retail theft. So therefore, you have a situation where you have low risk, high reward, and then you put in the advent of the internet. Now you have a blossoming ORC issue.
Which is the same thing that, for example, the cigarette smuggling in the state of New York. I mean, 57% of the cigarettes sold in the state is smuggled in. And I can't believe some statistic I read just last week, half of those smugglers used to be drug dealers. And they're making more money smuggling the cigarettes than they were the drugs, and they have less vulnerability, less exposure at it.
Well, and I think that raises another big issue, is the fact that we're now seeing ORC crimes becoming more violent. The criminals are now becoming more brazen because they are getting out of what those, you know, high risk crimes were, whether it's drugs, guns, what have you, and are now switching over to ORC now, which, as Jeff said, you know, there's less risk for them in those crimes. You know, they're not going to have a gun pulled on them for an ORC crime, which then puts the store employee in a bad situation when you have somebody who's, you know, who's going to come and steal the product and, you know, could potentially harm the employee or somebody else in the store. So again, it's part of our message, and I think, you know, incumbent upon all the LP execs to really explain to their members of Congress and state legislators why this is important, and those trends that we're seeing as far as the criminals getting out of, you know, drugs and guns and now getting into theft of baby formula and the profits they're making out of that. So,
and going to the issues of the states and the felony threshold level, we've had bad guys actually take calculators with them. And before they steal, they actually add up the value of the product that they're stealing to make sure that they're below the felony threshold level, because they, you know, if they can steal to $1,500 because that's the felony threshold level, they'll try to steal $1,500 because they know that $1 more makes it a felony.
There you go. So, John, I've got to take this opportunity. Is there any movement on a cybersecurity bill at the Hill?
At this point, probably not. Again, you know, we're pretty deadlocked in Congress right now. We're a couple months out from a congressional election, so it's unlikely we're going to see anything move. I think there's still a lot of committees are looking at jurisdictional issues over this. You still have a lot of fallout over the, you know, NSA and government intelligence, you know, spying issues. So it's unlikely we're going to see something move forwards. But from NRF's perspective, we would like to see a federal cybersecurity bill that moves forwards that allows for more information sharing among the government and industry, so we can better prepare and know what's happening and be prepared to tackle whatever the issues are. Also looking at data breach notification. You know, we have 47 states plus Washington, D.C. that have data breach notification laws on the books. We'd like to see a federal provision on that so everybody knows what the rules are, make it clear and concise so both the retailers and the consumers know what's required, as opposed to going to 47 different jurisdictions and nobody, you know, no two being the same.
In moving to the next point, from a privacy perspective, any developments legislatively there?
Again, the same. You know, we're still pretty deadlocked. It's one of those hot topics that everybody's taking a look at, and you have multiple committees of jurisdiction looking at these issues. You know, we're continuing to work. I mean, from our perspective, when it comes to legislation, we want to make sure that any legislation doesn't stifle innovation. You look at retail as one of the being the most innovative industries in the world. So we got to make sure that whatever legislation is put forward doesn't stifle what we do. But, you know, we're all about making sure the consumer has the best shopping experience they can have. So we want to make sure that whatever is done helps the shopper in their shopping experience.
Well, gentlemen, thanks for taking the time today.
Thank you,
Thank
Gus.
you.
Well, that's it for this episode, and we hope that you take the opportunity to get involved legislatively and support ORC legislation. Thanks for listening, and let's keep them safe out there.